The story originates from the country's largest port city, Lit. A large ship of adventurers arrives in the harbor bay. A guy comes off the deck of the ship and looks around contentedly. Shouting joyfully throughout the port, the boy in the red cloak can't believe he's finally here. Approaching the guest, the female rabbit offered to purchase the potion, but only after he did him some favors. Also noticing the new visitors, a man in a red bandana offered them to buy his fish at the best price in the market. Throughout the port, there were voices of merchants offering to provide storage for items or to train together. Looking at all of this, the boy in the red cloak was once again convinced that the port city of Lit was simply delightful. As he approached Raymond, a man with long white hair gave him a friendly hug and remarked that his friend appeared to be overjoyed. Dragging the kid behind him, Walker admitted he was excited too. Looking his buddies in the wake, the man in the green bandana said that, in fact, he was so glad to be here that he wanted to tell everyone in this desk how great he felt. And for the most part, it's not just because this port city is incredible in its own right. After all, this is where their long adventure will begin. It is a time when adventurers from all over the world write their own stories of grand journeys. This era is called the Age of Adventure. Gates are mysterious portals that have begun to suddenly appear all over the world. And these gates lead to worlds inhabited by horrifying monsters unknown to humans before. Countless adventurers have died inside the gate. However, the rewards of winning certainly outweigh the risks. This drives ambitious people to keep trying out new worlds. "We need decoys," Walker muttered, looking earnestly at his friends. Hearing these words, Raymond perplexedly asked his buddy what he meant. Then, the white-haired man explained that it was impossible to come up with a strategy before entering the gate, as no one knew what to expect there. Adventurers in many seasons had lost their lives in unforeseen circumstances for this very reason. This is why they have now started hiring decoy slaves. Nodding, Charlotte agreed that taking those who would distract the monsters while the other squad members ran away from the battlefield was a pretty good idea. After discussing all of this, the adventurer squad set out to find themselves suitable bait slaves. After greeting the visitors, the merchant told them that this place is owned and operated by the Gapper Trade Guild. Everyone here is a bait slave. There is a suitable item for every buyer here. Then, laughing, the slave trader added that his goods were guaranteed to repay the adventurers. With his hand pointing to two slaves, the man decided to recommend them to his guests. These two are relatively fresh, as the trader has just received them. After agreeing to the deal, Walker bought two slaves and traveled with a posse to the gate. Placing his hand on the hilt of his dagger, the squad leader told his comrades that the adventurers were leaving marks on the tree trunk, showing how many teams had entered this particular gate. The best part is that the gate that Walker and his team are about to enter has no markings, which means they'll be the first to enter. Leaving a scratch on the tree, the white-haired man turned to his friends and asked if they were ready for this outing. Looking at the gate with anticipation, the rest of the squad suggested that they should start sooner rather than later. Soon, the adventurers, along with two slaves, crossed the portal and found themselves in a strange forest with incredibly tall trees. Once on the other side of the gate, Raymond stumbled and nearly fell to the ground. Looking up, the boy saw something unbelievable. It turns out that in addition to the majestic trees, this forest also had incredibly huge and beautiful mushrooms. Looking around, Raymond realized that he had never been in such a bizarre place before. The atmosphere inside the gate was not what he had imagined. Asking his comrades not to panic, Walker suggested they keep walking. The portal usually opened far away from the monster's lair, so they were safe for now. You can't exit the same way you came in. The squad's priority now is to locate the gate with the exit. While Walker was telling his friends what they should do earlier, Charlotte heard some strange behind her. At the same instant, a horrible monster pounced on her, preparing to tear the girl apart with its huge fangs. Noticing the way this beast attacked their partner, the rest of the squad couldn't understand where the monster came from. However, as it turned out later, the enemy was not alone. Just a few seconds later, the entire team of adventurers found themselves surrounded by a horde of monsters. Realizing the mess they were in, Walker decided to act immediately. First of all, the man grabbed his staff and, using it like a bow, charged an attack with a fiery arrow. Firing a shot at the enemy, the squad leader instantly finished off the monster, thus freeing his wounded friend from its jaws. Turning to his partners, Walker warned that something was wrong here. He then ordered them to tie the decoys to the tree and get out of here immediately. Understanding what the adventurers were about to do to them, the slaves asked to be rescued. But threatening the decoy with a dagger, the tyrant yelled to him to shut his mouth and stand still. Tying one of the slaves to a tree, Raymond cried out in despair that he was sorry. Running away from the horde of monsters, the squad of adventurers could only hear the desperate cries of the decoys, begging not to leave them here. As expected, the two slaves did their job perfectly. The baits attracted all the critters to them, giving the adventurers enough time to escape. As he continued to run, Walker held the wounded Charlotte on his back. With a glance at his companions, the man explained that the task was postponed. They were not in the mood to hunt monsters right now. The first thing to do was to find a way out, and quickly. Meanwhile, Raymond was so frightened by what he saw that he even stopped paying attention to his friend's attempts to shout to him. Grabbing the boy by the scruff of the neck, Theron told the jerk to come to his senses and listen to Walker's instructions. First, they need to calm down. Their adventure completely failed this time, but they can prepare better and try again. It's too early to give up, and so there's no time to lose. Trying to encourage his shrunken friend, the fat man tried to convince him by telling him that together they would definitely survive. In the same second, the monster that suddenly appeared behind his back pressed Theron into the ground with its paw. Seeing his friend being finished off by the huge beast, the squad leader, still holding Charlotte on his shoulder, cried out in despair. When the creature lifted its paw, all the survivors saw that Theron was crushed like an insect. Unwilling to believe what was happening, Raymond, who had fallen to the ground, began to crawl backwards in fear. For his part, Walker wasn't going to accept the death of his friend so easily. And so, screaming in despair, he activated the fire arrow again. But the man never had time to attack his opponent. Abruptly turning around, the monster extended its tongue and tied it tightly around the squad leader's neck. Trying his best to free himself from the grip of the terrible beast, Walker panicked and asked Raymond to save him. In the next instant, the crunch of bones was heard. Shivering with fear, Raymond saw the creature eat his commander alive. Crawling away from the beast in terror, the boy began to call out for someone to save him. But very soon the monster was close by and, mouth wide open, prepared to devour the boy. Tying its tongue around his leg, it pulled the guy's limb into its mouth. Raymond immediately felt an unbearable pain and wailed. While the boy was screaming in pain, a man appeared nearby. Already almost completely drenched in his own blood, Raymond couldn't stop fighting for life and hoping that someone would save him. Suddenly, the guy noticed a man he knew standing in a tree. It turned out to be one of the bait slaves, who for some reason was still alive. Overjoyed that one of the slaves had survived, Raymond held out a trembling hand to him and asked him to help him sooner rather than later. Apologizing for what happened, the guy reminded the decoy that he was against it and didn't want to tie them to the tree at all. Then the boy added that the slave couldn't get out of here alone anyway and they needed to work together. However, no matter how much he begged, for some reason the bait wasn't answering him anything. The blue-haired guy with the slave block around his neck just sat in a tree and silently watched Raymond being chewed on. Looking at the bait in tears, Raymond asked why the hell he was just sitting idly by. If this piece of shit doesn't help him, the boy will die soon. With a smirk, the slave jumped down from the tree and deftly landed on the ground. Looking up, he explained to Raymond that as much as he wanted to, he definitely couldn't help anymore. The thing is, it's too late to help this adventurer. Feeling that the monster had already half swallowed him, Raymond looked hopelessly at the pool of blood right in front of his face. Stupid slave. The boy in the red cloak smiled in despair and muttered. Reaching out to the bait slave in tears, he screamed frantically that the bastard was not destined to survive on his own. One day it would be his turn. The very next second, the monster clenched its jaws tightly, finally swallowing its victim. As Raymond's arm, severed by the beast's fangs, fell to the ground, the creature looked grimly at the blue-haired lad with the spear standing nearby. Preparing to attack the next victim, the beast crouched to the ground and opened its mouth wide. With a lightning-fast burst of speed, the creature sprinted toward the blue-haired boy. Once very close to the guy, it extended its tongue to immobilize its victim, as it had done all the previous times. Surprisingly, however, the slave was incredibly calm. He continued to stand in place and looked at the approaching enemy with a cold-blooded gaze. Carrying the spear behind his back, the blue-haired boy mouthed that he thought he could survive. In just a moment, the guy was already behind the enemy's back, piercing him through with his spear and destroying his core. The monster died instantly, and its already breathless body landed right behind the bait slave's back. Yes, it is. That boy could easily survive here, all because this isn't where he died last time. Past life, 6 years later, current events. As they approached the edge of the cliff, the squad finally found the one they had been searching for so long. There are many winged monsters flying around, big and small, strong and weak. But none of them compare to the one these brave men have come to fight today. Mankind's greatest enemy, the Dragon King Gornthal. The Centauri nest was also destroyed. This means that the squad that came here today has no one else to rely on. From the Knights of Cygnus, the Resistance, the Crusaders and Adventurers, to the 6 heroes that people have pinned their hopes on. All of them are dead and did not live to see the final battle with the Dragon King. There is only one man left who can save the entire species. The latest adventurer, Elpham. And returning to his partners, Elpham said to follow him. As he approached the edge of the cliff, the boy looked tensely at the Dragon King flying high in the sky. That's right, today is their final adventure. A few hours later, the forests are burning with a rapidly spreading fire. The once vibrant valley has become a living hell on Earth. Elpham, finally exhausted, sits on his knees, no longer paying attention to what's going on around him. Around the last adventurer lie the breathless bodies of his comrades, and right in front of the guy lies the bloody corpse of a small dragon with its mouth wide open. Looking up into the sky, Elpham realized that the end seemed to have come. Dragon King Gornthal was flying high in the sky like nothing had happened even after hours of fierce battle. The squad survived a heavy blow, but managed to chop off one head only to see it regenerate again. All their efforts were in vain, and so, now fully recovered, the dragon flew at great speed to kill the last adventurer. Looking at it hopelessly, Elpham resigned himself to his fate. Closing his eyes, the boy already prepared to meet his end. But saddest of all, this is not only the end of Elpham's long adventure, but of the world. However, suddenly the boy slammed his bloody fist on the ground. Lifting himself up, he sent the whole thing to hell. There's no way the guy's gonna let it end this way. Philip died protecting the last adventurer from another dragon strike. Jaden's arm was blown off. This guy couldn't take the massive blood loss and died in Elpham's arms. The last member of the squad was Alesis, who simply could not escape the dragon's huge maw. All of them gave their lives for the victory of humanity. Raising his head, the scarred Elphama shouted that he refused to accept it. Overcome with incredible pain, the last adventurer gathered his strength and got to his feet. Turning his gaze to Gorntail, he promised himself that he would not perish so easily. Extending his arm out in front of him, Elpham took aim at the dragon flying high in the sky. Concentrating all his remaining strength into one spell, the guy decided to end this battle with one shot. This battle will decide the fate and future of all mankind. That's why Elpham will kill this monster, even if it's the last thing the guy gets to do. But very soon, all hope of finishing off Gornthale came to naught. Noticing that the latest adventurer was about to attack him, the Dragon King used supersonic speed to disarm the enemy. Elpham's webbing burst, and the lad himself fell to his knees without strength. At the same time, Dragon King Gorntail finished preparing the final spell. In just a second, the flying monster spewed a powerful stream of purple flame from its mouth. Looking at the inevitable death approaching him, Elpham remarked how pathetic a sight it was. Why did the end have to be like this? If only he had great power. If he could start over again, he certainly wouldn't let this outcome happen. "Get up, you piece of shit!" came an angry voice, and then Elpham felt someone pouring cold water on him. Standing in front of the kid, the man with the bucket in his hand said he was well aware that the brat was healthy. While the bald merchant was telling his stupid bait slave not to forget his place, Elpham was trying to figure out where Gornthale had gone. It wasn't until some time later that it dawned on the guy that he was still alive for some reason. Noticing the pads on his arms and neck, the boy immediately realized where exactly he had gotten to. This is a slave market, and Elpham himself is a commodity here. Trying to catch his breath, he couldn't understand what was going on. This was nonsense. Slave markets were banned a long time ago, but the boy is quite sure that he is not mistaken. Elpham remembers exactly that this is the same merchant who bought it at the market 6 years ago. The boy was already a slave in those days, and this bald man had bought him out for his own use. While the guy was trying to figure out what was wrong, the merchant gave him an annoyed look and asked what the hell he was looking at. Then, without taking his eyes off the fist flying into his face, it finally dawned on Elpham that he had traveled back in time. Now the boy had no doubts. On this day, he returned to the moment when it had just begun. After enduring the slave trader's beatings, Elpham sat down in a corner of the dungeon and began to ponder everything that was happening to him now. On the one hand, it might seem like a normal dream, but the guy is completely sure it's not. The sensations are too real to be just a fantasy. It doesn't make sense, but Elpham just can't find any other explanation. The boy's thoughts were interrupted by a merchant who showed the next group of adventurers his best and relatively fresh slaves. Glancing at Walker, Elpham finally figured it out. He had been given a second chance to avert a world catastrophe. Several hours later, when the adventurer squad had already been completely defeated outside the gate, picking up the calm Walker's weapon, Elpham noted that the Staff of Fire Arrow was a pretty good ability for continued survival. The ability itself isn't all that outstanding, but it's a great fit for the guy right now. Be that as it may, it's still not enough. The adventurer group must have brought other things with them if they plan to farm here. After noticing the severed foot of one of the members of the adventurer squad, the boy decided to check his shoes for valuable items. Some people have a habit of putting expensive things in their boots. Taking the severed leg out of his boot, Elpham pulled out a rather interesting ring from there. It turned out that there was a telekinesis ring in the shoes of the murdered adventurer. While examining the new thing, the boy heard suspicious noises nearby. Turning around, the guy saw many monsters standing behind the trees. They must have come at the smell of blood. Taking his spear in hand, Elpham prepared to repel the numerous attacks of his opponents. Seeing that one of the creatures was attacking him from the back, the guy turned sharply and made a huge hole in the enemy's body with his spear. Meanwhile, one of the monsters reached for the boy with its tongue to try and tie its victim tightly and immobilize him. To avoid falling for this trick, Elpham put his spear in front of him, thus blocking the enemy's attack. However, as expected, this creature's tongue is very powerful, and so it had no trouble breaking the guy's spear. At this turn of events, the slave stood dumbfounded, wondering how he should deal with his enemies next. At the same moment, with its mouth wide open, another monster pounced at him from behind. The guy had just a blink of an eye to grab his staff from behind his back and activate a fire arrow. In one move, Elpham dodged his opponent's attack and burned him through with his staff. Taking a look at the arrow he had just fired, the slave decided to try out something else. Just recently, he had gotten a rather entertaining ring, and so it would be a sin not to use it. Extending his arm, the guy used telekinesis on a fire arrow, then with a circular motion of his hand, he interrupted the monsters surrounding him. Soon, the mana of the fire arrows finally ran out. Looking at the burned corpses of his enemies, Elpham realized that he would definitely not be able to use one arrow for long. And unfortunately, with this rather creative attack, the guy didn't manage to finish off all the monsters after all. It was a shame that he wouldn't be able to use telekinesis for long, but not that it mattered to Elpham. He could create a new fire arrow at any moment. But as the boy pulled out his staff, he noticed something strange. Without activating the spell, the slave bounced out of his seat, dodging the paws of the creatures that had pounced on him. For some reason, Elpham failed to activate the fire arrow. But the staff isn't broken. What happened? Does this weapon have a reload time? After thinking it over, the guy realized that he simply had no other choice. Standing up, the slave began to fight the monsters with his staff as if he were holding some heavy club or sword. Noticing the creature running toward him, Elpham struck the enemy several times in the muzzle with his staff. Finally, the boy kicked his opponent with great force with his foot, gouging out several of his teeth. It was enough to finish off the monster without even using magic. It was also completely enough time for Elpham's main weapon to reload. Hitting the ground with his staff, the guy gathered all the fire energy. Meanwhile, the monsters pounced on him in a pack, preparing to tear the boy to pieces. But it was exactly what the slave expected. Extending his staff in front of him, Elpham unleashed a fiery arrow. Immediately afterward, he decided to use the telekinesis ring once more. Subduing his fire arrow, the guy finished off all the remaining opponents with a few sweeps of his hand. Before he died, Raymond said that a bait slave would surely die alone in this place. I guess he was wrong after all. Looking around to make sure no one was left alive, Elpham heard someone's hoarse voice. Still alive, Charlotte, regaining consciousness, called out to the boy. Coughing, the hooded girl asked the boy if he was an unusual bait slave. Turning around on her, Elpham was surprised that this girl was still alive. She's pretty lucky. Though, considering what would happen next, that statement was incorrect. Charlotte, in turn, looking at the slave with hatred, asked who the hell he was. Where did he get this fighting ability and magic from? Then the girl noticed the weapon of her already dead comrade in the hands of this guy. Why is he holding that staff in his hand? How did he even manage to use it? Where did he get the ring around his wrist? How could a bait slave awaken such powers? It wasn't until some time later that it finally came to Charlotte. This whole anomaly today is because of this guy. As soon as the girl said this, Elpham looked at her with disdain. "Did you finish?" the boy inquired, stepping closer. Looking at him perplexed, Charlotte asked the slave what he was going to do. However, what Elpham is about to do to her now is clearly not going to please this girl. No matter. Even if the other adventurers in her squad were still alive, the guy was going to kill them all anyway. This scum used humans as bait to survive, and the Elpham despised those like her. Soon, having finished with all the business outside the gate, the lad made his way back to the port city. Rumors spread throughout the city in a matter of hours. Even though this fact was confirmed, many residents for a long time could not believe that the bait slave was the only one who had returned alive from the gate. The lot has been cast, and so Elpham needs to act quickly to avoid repeating the same fate as in his previous life. But the boy needs to act consistently and do things in order. First of all, he will get rid of his status as a slave. That the slave returned from the gate alive is nothing short of amazing. So, Mr. Ebbis, to whom the messenger had just reported it, was not at once able to verify what had happened. Reportedly, this guy actually came in unscathed. Except Abbas can't figure out what's so unusual about that. Is it news that a bait slave came back from a camping trip uninjured? However, as the messenger later explained, all the adventurers from the team that the boy was on had died in the gate. It turns out this slave survived on his own. This has really never happened before, and it's definitely very strange. What's more, this guy decided to file a report instead of just running away. Those who became slaves because of huge debts cannot escape the fate of being used as bait again. Since this boy didn't try to escape, it means he realizes how difficult it is to hide from slave owners. After all, death is the only way to freedom for a slave. Upon finishing the messenger's report, an irritated Mr. Ebbis asked if that was all he wanted to talk about. So this is how things are done in the Gapor Trade Guild? Is it really necessary to report to one of the leader's chief minions about such trivial matters? Shaking his head, the messenger said his master had something else to learn. As recently revealed, this ramp has awakened the first round. Surprised by this statement, Ebbis lit his cigar again and asked the messenger if he was mistaken. How could an ordinary bait slave have a circle? If that was true, then the Happer Guild could use someone like that in their ranks. But this guy must have a bad opinion of their guild now that he had been a slave. While Mr. Ebbis, smoking a cigar, was thinking how he should proceed, the messenger added that that bait slave had asked to change his contract. He wanted to register as an adventurer. Looking dumbfounded at his subordinate, the man with the cigar in his hand asked who the damn slave even thought he was. But placing his hand on his chest, the messenger explained that Mr. Larkin wished his faithful acolyte to handle the situation personally. Hearing this, a shocked Ebbis jumped up from the table, unable to believe that Mr. Larkin himself had trusted him to talk to this guy. Why would the executive head of the guild be interested in a stinking slave? Even though even this kid had awakened the first circle, it still didn't negate his position in society. As he pondered this, Ebbis looked at the book on his desk, and at the same moment an idea occurred to him. When one of the chapter's chief minions asked to be left to his own devices, the messenger left the office and closed the door behind him. Pulling back his chair, Abby's placed his cigar on the ashtray. A bait slave eager to become an adventurer, really? The man mused thoughtfully, walking over to the window. In the name of Emperor Singus, slavery was abolished, but only conditionally. Humans have always been slaves to the miso, the currency of this world. Those who could not repay the loan on time were obliged to work it off. This simple law introduced off-caste slaves into Maple's world. When Elpum's father, the only family he had, passed away from illness, the boy became one of these off-caste slaves. He purchased the ingredient black moss from the Gapper Trade Guild to cure his father, promising to pay later. The guild demanded 1,000,000 meso, several times the market price. As a result, Elpum, as the defendant, failed to pay the Gapper Trade Guild the promised 1,000,000 meso on time. That was why the boy was officially sentenced by the court to do corrective labor in the guild for a set amount of time. For 6 whole years, these scumbags exploited Elpam. So now the guy finally decided it was time for revenge. And so the boy sits before Ebbis, a loyal servant of Larkin, one of the executive heads of the guilds. It is not a bad thing for him to meet a man of such rank at the very beginning of his journey. Raising a cup of tea, Ebbis said rumors had reached him, as if Elpam wanted to make changes to the contract. With a clatter, the man put his cup on the table and suggested getting straight to the point, as he had already been told enough about his guest today. With a confident look at the boy, Abby's promised to register him as an F-rank adventurer. Thanking the gentleman, Elpam noted with a smile on his face that the man had accepted his offer quite easily. Most likely the reason for this was the awakening of the first circle. Be that as it may, he's still not happy with those conditions. Deciding that he wouldn't play the game according to the rules of the Happer Guild, the guy demanded to be assigned an E-rank. Ebbis leaned back in his chair and asked the boy why he'd thought he'd be given an E-rank so easily. He had not even been officially recognized by the Adventurers Association. Elpam reminded his master that he had been through the gate as a bait slave hundreds of times in the past 3 years. And when Ebbis pointed out that the guy was just there as bait, but he was still new at killing monsters, the slave wondered, since when adventurers were judged on their ability to hunt monsters, the first adventurer earned great fame for his survival skills. The main goal of any adventure is to return alive from the journey, and even Ebbis himself can't disagree. It's true that the information a survivor brings back is more valuable than combat merit. this kid is really thinking rationally. Honestly, the fact that he's survived and come back in oodles of times by being bait is already a great accomplishment. However, that's the end of it. Decoys are only taken to the lower level gates. Does this kid really believe that his paltry survival skills will save his ass in a high-level gate? Taking a cigar from behind his sinus, Mr. Ebbis explained to the lad that he was very much mistaken if he took the guild of Happor for Cretans, who would sign a contract with a self-righteous idiot. If this asshole keeps overestimating himself, he's going to die very soon. Despite this, however, intuition tells Ebbis that this slave is not as ordinary as it may seem at first glance. After thinking it over, the man told Elpham that there was a gate with a limit of 5 people and 12 marks on the shaft. Grinning, Ebbis said the boy got it right. 12 tags means that at least 12 groups of 5 went in there and did not return. This is a very good chance for Elpham to prove to the Happer Guild that he is worthy of the rank he is asking for. If this kid pulls it off, Mr. Abbas will not change the terms of his contract. A few hours later, somewhere in the woods near the port city, noticing an unkempt fellow in a cloak and carrying a staff behind his back, the squad captain immediately realized that this must be the newcomer who was to join them. Holding out his hand to the boy, the man introduced himself as Shev, the tank of this team. Mr. Abbas had already told him that the new member of their squad used to be a bait slave. Pointing a finger at his companions, Chev asked the newcomer not to worry about it, explaining that they didn't care about their new partner's past. As Elpham also said hello to his new teammates, the tank remembered hearing that he had heard as if this guy could use fire magic. Then, approaching the commander, a swarthy man with gray hair clarified wasn't any magic available to mages. Looking at his friend, Chev explained that mages could only control the element they were predisposed to from birth. That's why it's useless for them to take an object that doesn't match their element. Noticing that he was getting off topic, the squad leader told the newcomer that, as he already knew, the purpose of their squad on this mission was not to hunt monsters. Today, they needed to return the items that had been dropped by the other 12 teams that had come here earlier. That would be the end of their team's work. The guild is willing to pay 3,000 mises for each item. With an irritated sigh, the gray-haired man muttered that this was a true robbery in broad daylight. Those adventurers had 1 round each, which meant that their items were worth at least 7,000 each. These old men from the guild management are incredibly greedy. Asking his buddy not to complain, the squad leader asked if everyone was ready to hit the road. It was time to earn some money. Soon the team crossed the portal and found themselves on the other side of the gate. Looking around, the gray-haired man noticed that, although it was quite bright, it was still eerie. Chev said, looking at the terrain, that it was very likely that the task would take a long time to complete. So the squad should set up camp. Pointing to the tree, one of the team members suggested the leader to base himself on the top. There were many strong branches there, so it would be convenient to take cover behind them in case of emergency. Plus, it would be easier to find a better place from the top. Saying that it wasn't a bad idea, Chev suggested that the others start building the camp as soon as possible. Giving Elpham a friendly hug, the gray-haired man said that he and the dumbass behind him were experts in construction, and so the boy could rest a bit for now. After a couple of hours, the construction of the camp was finished. Now that everything was ready, Chev suggested that they split into 2 groups and explore the area. Tom, Max, and Rod will go together. Elpham and the squad leader will check the western wall, while the second group will go to explore the eastern wall. If something happens, each group will have to signal and quickly return to the base to decide what to do next. Having sorted out their roles, all the squad members set out to explore the area. Even after several minutes of trekking to the western wall, the first group still hadn't come across a single monster. Apparently, the group had camped too close to the entrance. Suggesting that his partner go deeper into the forest tomorrow, Chev asked how he felt about his first assignment as an adventurer. To this, Elpham replied that he was a little nervous. Laughing, the squad leader said that he understood the boy perfectly. In fact, Chev was still worried every time he entered the gate, even though he had gained a little experience. Even though this man is not the bravest man in the world, he continues to step forward boldly because he is surrounded by people who matter to him. Chev doesn't know what it sounds like from the outside, but he can say with certainty that his comrades are really good. He really felt sorry for him when he first heard Elpham's story. The man can't even imagine how hard it was for that boy when he was a bait slave. Taking one look at the newcomer, Chev gave him permission to join their team permanently if he wanted to, of course. However, looking at Elpum, the squad leader noticed that he had fallen far behind for some reason and had stopped to the side. Laughing, the man asked the boy not to take his words too seriously. Already in the evening, when all the team members gathered around the fire, it became clear that no one had found anything. Taking a bite of some meat, Chev suggested that his friends dispense with talking about work, at least over a meal. And while his teammates cheerfully discussed something, Elpum just kept quiet and occasionally sipped water. Night had fallen. The full moon could be seen high in the sky, illuminating the whole forest. Amidst the sounds of crickets, the light crackling of the fire could be heard. Approaching the sleeping Elpum with torch in hand, the squad leaders called out to the boy. With Steele standing next to him, Chev asked the guy if he was asleep, but the man heard only silence in reply. Elpum lay covered with a blanket and did not even turn to look at him. Then one of the squad members put his hand on the commander's shoulder and asked why he had asked the question. Taking out his dagger, it was the gray-haired man who explained that it was already clear to everyone that this kid was too sound asleep to answer. Max wondered if the commander had forgotten what they'd put in that slave's dinner, noting that Chev was being overly cautious as usual. That thing was powerful enough to put a giant mushroom to sleep, and this guy literally ate it all up. He's lucky to be alive. Laughing maliciously, the gray-haired man swung his dagger and shouted that with the staff of fire arrows, they would earn at least 10,000 misas. So it was time to get down to business. The very next second, Max plunged the blade of his knife into the cloth that Elpum was covered with. But to his surprise, the dagger went in too tightly and hit something hard. Lifting the sheet, the gray-haired man saw that beneath it lay a log with several pillows tied to it. Looking at the log, the rest of the squad couldn't figure out where this guy had gone. Turning to his companions, Chev ordered them to find the freak as soon as possible. He shouldn't have gotten far, so he was definitely in the neighborhood. At the same instant, a massive explosion rang out, blowing the entire adventurers' camp apart. The fire took seconds to cover the huge tree on which the squad was based. Still not understanding what the hell was going on, Chev told the others to rather save the food and other valuables. While the commander was searching for the culprit of this incident, a startled Tom called out to him and pointed his finger somewhere. A giant yellow monster towered before the adventurers and stared at them eerily with one of its eyes. That's when it came to Chev's attention that the scumbag Elpum was using them. All this time, he was counting on using his new partners as bait to lure the monster outside. Fleeing from the rapidly spreading fire and the suddenly appearing enemy, the adventurers jumped from the tree. As soon as they left the platform, the monster immediately devoured it in one bite. As Elpum watched, he remembered Chev's terrible acting. He shouldn't have been kind if he wanted to deceive his victim so badly. This gate had finished off 12 teams, and they suddenly decided to welcome a former bait slave with open arms. It would make sense if they treated someone with more experience that way, but inviting someone they hadn't had much contact with to permanently join the squad was very rash. Chev's plans were obvious. Chev's, be that as it may, Elpum had been played by the gullibility of the four of them. He managed to provoke the dungeon boss without even making any effort. As it continued to stalk its victims, the giant yellow creature destroyed everything in its path. Looking back at the monster crawling behind him, a dumbfounded Chev realized that for him and his team, this was the worst type of opponent. Trying to keep up with his commander, Tom asked if he knew anything about the creature. Chev replied that it was a golden slug. His body is made of acid, making him the worst enemy for a squad in which all the fighters only know how to fight in close combat. And when the commander wanted to say that this monster had another advantage, he felt the ground shudder. Pushing his partner running behind him, Chev saved him from the suddenly arriving projectile. Staring in horror at the spot where he had just stood, a dumbfounded Tom asked what the hell that had just been. Rising to his feet, the squad leader revealed that among other things, this monster was able to attack from a distance. It is an acid arrow, an ability that shoots acid. Hearing this, the distraught Tom shouted that it wasn't fair. How could they, fighters who only fought in close combat, defeat this creature? Asking his partner to stop panicking, Chev warned the ravine was advancing again. In fact, they have a small chance of defeating this monster. First, the team needs to get out of the attack radius and then get into a battle formation. The acid arrow has a recharge time of 1 minute. During this time, they will have time to destroy the core located in the center of the golden slime ball's head. Glancing hopefully back at the creature that had pursued them, Max noted that such a long ability rollback time might actually play to their advantage. Abruptly turning around, the gray-haired man explained that there was no point in waiting, as the enemy had recently used the acid arrow. Heading towards the monster, Max jumped into the air and shouted that it would be easier to finish this creature off here and now. Noticing one of the friends was about to deal with the dungeon boss alone, a frightened Chev tried to stop him, shouting that they should act together. In the same instant, a golden slime ball sliced Max in half with an acid arrow. Such an attack could not have been expected neither by the squad leader nor by his dead partner. How could this happen? The recharge time wasn't over yet. Max should have had at least 10 seconds left. While the shocked Chev was trying to figure out how the monster managed to overcome the ability rollback limit, the enemy launched several more attacks. In the end, all that was left of the adventurers were bones, which soon dissolved the acid as well. That's it! Elpham didn't even have to get his hands dirty to finish these bastards off. So, in theory, Chev was right about this monster. Except that the golden slime bug gets stronger with each item consumed. Quite expectedly, the recharge time might have decreased after eating 12 teams of adventurers. Unpredictable stature and the ability to launch acid arrows without reloading. Elpham seems to have figured out why past teams died. This monster is out of their league. In such a state, such a creature would easily be able to hold out in this yellow gate, which was 2 levels below the red gate. It was unlikely that adventurers with one circle had any chance of overpowering it. Well, no items can be returned from these enemies, and so the task can be considered over. At least this mission is only over for the team Elpham was on. Grinning, the boy realized he couldn't just walk out of here. He still had to prove to that arrogant old man that he was worthy of being an E-rank adventurer. Meanwhile, the dungeon boss continued to calmly creep in one direction, dissolving the ground and trees in its path. Suddenly, the golden slime ball felt someone's presence. At the same second, a fiery arrow flew into his face, shattering half of his head. But even with the full power of this attack, the monster still managed to survive and heal its wound. Standing in the tree and watching the enemy recover, Elpham noticed that the creature had a really impressive resistance to magic. Even though the guy was aiming for the core, the golden slime ball still survived. Now it would take at least 5 more shots to defeat it. Not that that was a problem. After all, Elpham had killed plenty of such creatures in his past life, so even now he doesn't mind dealing with this slug to get proof. As soon as the boy drew his dagger, the opponent attacked him with an acid arrow. When he noticed this, the guy jumped down, whereupon the projectile flying at him shattered the tree behind him. Not a couple seconds later, the monster continued to attack Elpham. Without slowing down, the guy began to move towards the enemy, dodging each of his attacks. Elpham needs as many as 5 shots to finish off the monster. Moreover, each attack must come from the same place. A mere magician can only dream of such a thing. But Elpham is very different from the others. Although he is also a magician, his approach is completely different from anyone else's. In a previous life, this guy was known as the greatest telekineticist. Closing in on the enemy, the boy took his staff in one hand and activated a fire arrow. The arrow whistled into the monster's body before exploding, once again blowing the creature's head apart. Beginning to recover from his wound, the enemy fired another shot in Elpham's direction. The guy in turn thrust the sword tied to the rope into the tree, used it like a cat hook, and dodged the attack with ease. As the boy jumped back with his foot against the tree, the acid arrow grazed the trunk and exploded. Flying around the tree on the other side, Elpham activated the fire arrow again. After striking his opponent's head, the guy started to change position. He had only some 3 shots left to fire, and then the slime ball would be defeated. Continuing with the same battle tactics, Elpham used one of the trees to maneuver, just like last time. Finding himself in a fortunate position, the boy once again struck the enemy with a fiery arrow. However, at one point, the monster still dodged the guy's attack. Noticing that this hulk was quite nimble for its size, Elpham leaned against the tree trunk again. In any case, no matter how much the creature resisted, it was all to no avail. Using a ring of telekinesis, the guy effortlessly redirected the arrow that flew past into the slug's head. Now the boy only had 1 shot left to finally finish off the monster. For this time, the creature will not be able to recover and protect the core that protrudes outward. Abruptly pouncing on his opponent, Elpham had already prepared to end the battle with a fire arrow shot. Charging one last attack, the guy was sure it was over for this monster. But the boy didn't seem to realize that he was actually trapped and the slug was already preparing to crush him. The monster's huge hand had already almost turned Elpham into a flapjack. Just as suddenly, the guy turned around and looked at his palm. Clutching the sword tightly in his hand, he activated the telekinesis ring. With a wave of his hand, the boy thrust his sword into the ground before pulling the rope. The enemy's blow came right where Elpham had been standing just a second before. After dodging the monster's attack, The guy landed on the ground and immediately pointed his staff at the enemy. When the boy fired a fire arrow at his opponent, the terrified slug tried to defend himself by covering the core with the palm of his hand. However, Elpham expected the monster to do something like this. With a sly smile, the guy used a ring of telekinesis on the fire arrow, thus causing the arrow to fly around the palm of his enemy's hand. After flying into the enemy at a tremendous speed, the fire projectile exploded with a deafening explosion. The core stored in the monster's head shattered into pieces from the power of this explosion. At the same time, the creature's body began to swell. Soon, the monster reached such a size that it couldn't bear the load and exploded following the fire arrow. It seemed that the danger had passed and the task of destroying the dungeon boss had been accomplished. But that wasn't all. Elpham had to flee from the huge wave of acid coming toward him. Since this guy possesses telekinesis, he certainly had no trouble leaving the dangerous place. Running away from the acid, he threw a sword with a rope tied to its hilt into the nearest tree. Upon reaching this tree, the sword wrapped a rope around one of the branches. When Elpham reached safety, a strong wave of boiling acid rushed under his feet. Now all the guy has to do is wait for things to calm down. After a while, the acid began to cool and go underground. Realizing that it was already safe on the ground, Elpham jumped down. Walking towards where he had recently finished off the dungeon boss, the boy spotted what he was looking for. Nearby, among the debris of trees and soil, some small thing glowed. Extending his arm forward, Elpham used telekinesis on this glowing orb and pulled it toward him. It turned out to be some kind of energy blob containing the soul of a dead golden slime ball. This thing is going to be the evidence that will help the guy make sure he gets an E rank. Except that the boy wasn't going to carry this blob of energy to Mr. Abyss. The most advantageous thing in his situation was to use this thing to his advantage. Hours later, after escaping the dungeon, Elpham went straight to the guild leader's loyal servant Gapper. Seeing the surviving slave baiter in front of him again, Abyss just sat there with his cigar in his teeth for a while longer, staring at him thoughtfully. "So, you're not just a talker," the man soon said. After these words, he noticed that the boy had come alone again, and even without the items he had promised to return. In response, Elpham explained that the team he was introduced to was made up of absolute beginners. Moreover, they had tried to kill him to get his item. Later, it seems they encountered a monster boss and died running away from it. With a tense glance at the boy, Abby's asked if he had seen this boss. After confirming this, the guy revealed that that monster turned out to be a golden slime ball. This meant that the items left by past adventurers had been corroded by acid. It turns out that the guild has lost all the items lent by the adventurer. That's a huge loss. Also, the fact that this slave is back is another problem. Several universal rules apply to all gates. First, each gate has a limit on the number of people who can enter, and it is marked on the trunk in front of the entrance. When the limit is reached, the gate is deactivated until all entrants are dead. Second, there is a limit on which adventurers can enter a gate of a certain color. The difficulty of the gate ranges from red to purple in color. If an adventurer's rank exceeds the allowable rank, they will not be able to enter the gate. Thirdly, the adventurer is given only one chance to clear the gates. This is the main difficulty associated with its capture. As soon as someone comes out of the gate alive, it immediately disappears, and no one else can enter it. Another opportunity is only given when all team members have died in the gate. Now, however, the gate and the rewards are gone. Honestly, a golden slime bug is too powerful a monster for a one-round adventurer, and Abby's realizes that. Which is why it immediately came to the man's attention that this kid was very lucky to get out of there. The very fact that he barely left the gate explains why he didn't manage to bring back a single item. It's understandable that all the items were obviously destroyed. But whatever the reason, the bait slave failed in his task. Interrupting his master, Elpham asked the man not to jump to conclusions. Saying that he wasn't done reporting yet, the boy began to untie the cuffs. What Abbas saw next shocked him. This boy absorbed the golden slime ball and awakened the second circle. Dazedly looking at the guy, Abbas asked if he had absorbed the mana stone dropped from the dungeon boss. Lowering his hand, Elpham said that should be enough to prove his abilities. Now, the boy wanted the head acolyte to register him as an E-rank adventurer. D-rank? The man sitting across from him suddenly spoke up, thus greatly surprising the boy. I'll register you as a D-rank, and if you agree to work exclusively for me, you'll be a C-rank. After this sudden offer, only a couple minutes had passed, and Elpham was already sitting down to sign the contract. The C rank for an adventurer without a third circle is prohibitive. The rank of adventurers is strongly related to the number of circles. In this world, the strength corresponding to the number of circles varies greatly. There are only 3 levels of adventurers: beginner from E to F rank, junior from C to D rank, and honored from B and above. Anyway, it became clear to Abbas almost immediately that this guy was clearly an exception to the rule. Not everyone could get a circle by using a mana stone. Plus, he has an instinct for self-preservation. It was an instinct far superior to those Abbas had picked up from familiar adventurers. This kid earned a second round in the blink of an eye right after the first. And since his speed is unheard of, Mr. Abbas wants you to hire him no matter what. Sighing, Elpham realized that things were going better than he had expected. This man must be desperate for him, so he wouldn't miss the chance to sign the contract. And unfortunately, or fortunately, this guy is going to come in handy very soon. The first conquest of the 100-man Red Gate is just about to take place. According to Elpham's recollection, around this time there would be a huge event that all the trade and adventure guilds in Lida would be interested in. Gapper would surely turn his attention to it as well. That's not a bad thing at all, because Elpham is in a hurry too, and he could use some speeding up of his plan. Having signed the contract, the lad turned to Mr. Abbas and requested permission to ask a favor. When the man allowed him to say what he wanted to say, the boy immediately held out his hand. "Lend me some money," Elpham muttered, looking calmly at the gentleman. In response, Abbas only looked at the guy with a smile and put down his cigar. What a bastard! Is he serious right now? While some argue that the appearance of the gates has spawned an era of adventure, they are actually a trap set by a dark mage. Many adventurers have died at the gate, slowly but surely robbing the world of Maple's potential. And then came the day of the apocalypse. A huge number of monsters, as if waiting for this moment, came out of the gate, and mankind was defeated. The described event will take place exactly 3 years later. The tragic fate of the world of Maple, which is destined to face it, is not far off. Smoking a cigar, Mr. Abbas stands at the window of his office and looks pensively out into the street. There, outside the window, he notices Elpham going about his business. This boy has a long way to go, but probably the money his master has given him will be enough to start carrying out what he has planned. The newly found gate for 100 people is red in color, meaning that only those with 2 circles or less can enter there. The Gapor Trade Guild usually hires adventurers with high ranks. The only reason to invest in Elpham is because they're targeting that gate, and they need some fighters right away. A guy finally has money, but he needs to use it wisely. You don't want to spend it all at once. However, truly useful items are too expensive. Then what is the best thing to spend borrowed money on? Thinking about it, Elpham walked up to the entrance of the city market. Stopping on the threshold, the guy looked up at the sign above his head. At the same moment, a merchant ran up to the boy and welcomed him to Reese's labor market. The man in the red bandana asked to be allowed to help the visitor, noting that the visitor looked like an adventurer. The merchant asked the gracious lord what exactly he was looking for. A bait slave? Or a partner to fight alongside him? Shaking his head, Elpham revealed that he was looking for a certain person. And when the boy asked the peddler to take him to this man, the slave trader in the red bandana asked the visitor exactly who he meant. Showing the guest the punishment rooms, the market worker told him that this is where the most problematic people are sent for correctional purposes. And the one Elpham is looking for is one of them. As he approached the last chamber, the merchant told the visitor that he needed to go this way. In a prison cell sat a man chained up. The mere sight of him sent a cold sweat running down the slave trader's face. Turning to the gentleman, the man in the red bandana asked if he was sure of his choice. However, when he decided to warn his guest about the slave's quirks, Elpham said that he was aware of it. Yeah, that's the bastard the guy was looking for. The death of one man hastened the destruction of Maple's world in Elpham's past life. Aaron, the halberd heroine, was killed. The culprit turned out to be none other than her only student. The hero of the murder, Debo. This case marked the beginning of the end. Looking irritated at the visitor, Debo wondered if it was him he was looking for. Then, spitting carelessly, the slave realized that they had never seen each other before, and so he asked the stranger to get the hell out of here. After apologizing to the gracious gentleman, the frightened merchant said that this I don't see yet should be taught manners. The hero of the assassination, Debo, will earn fame and position in a few years. But now, even as a slave, he dares to defy the adventurer who might become his master. The term insolent does not fully capture his character. With a sigh, the merchant remarked that this slave was a true savage and even a barbarian. And Elpham couldn't agree more with that statement. After all, Debo was the most powerful person after Elpham when the apocalypse happened. People have often compared them, as they both come from the same region and have a lot in common, from when they awakened their powers to how powerful they became. However, the main similarity is quite different. When Debo came out of the cage, Elpham asked how much he would cost him. The slave grinned as he stretched his arms and remarked that the dude seemed to be from a rich family. Be that as it may, the man wasn't sure this guy could afford to buy him. After all, he'd have to fork out as much as 1,000,000 maces to do it. Surely that's too much for this rotten bastard. That's right. The main similarity between these two is that they were both desperate for money. This barbarian's younger sister is suffering from a black-blooded plague. That's why Debo immediately told the stranger to bugger off if he didn't have enough money with him. But, as it turned out, the man's expectations were not met. What he saw next surprised him greatly. Taking money out of his pocket, Elpham showed him 1,000,000 mesos. Also surprised at such a huge sum, the merchant asked the lord if he was sure of his decision. But after putting the money back away, Elpham told the slave that he raved too soon. He's going to sign a 1-year contract with a 7-3 profit split. The guy is going to sign a contract for a year with a 7-3 split of the profits. Looking at the visitor in surprise, the merchant couldn't believe his ears. He's trying to hire this man as a member of the team, not as a slave. Holding out the contract to Debo, the boy asked him to peruse the terms. Asking the stranger not to take back his words for anything, the slave immediately snatched the piece of paper from his hand. Without even looking at the contract, Debo bit down on his finger. Without hesitation, the man put his bloody finger on the piece of paper, thus sealing the deal. It seems, as before, he's in a hurry to take care of his little sister. Nodding, Elpham confirmed that the contract was signed, and so they should go straight to the gate. Smiling contentedly, Debo shrieked happily. He had been waiting for this dude to say that. With a serious look at his old new friend, Elpham explained that he had to prove his worth. In response, Debo only smiled even wider and assured the lad that he was the most agile he had ever met. Soon the two were heading into the forest near the trading city where the first gate was located. Following his boss, a puzzled Debo turned to him. The man really likes his new weapon, but he feels more confident with the long sword. Shouldn't he learn something he has more experience with? Turning to his subordinate, Elpham explained that as long as they worked together, the barbarian would only use the halberd. If he objected, the contract could always be terminated. Sighing frustratedly, Debo asked his boss if they would be practicing today in this red gate with one tag and a limit of 8 people. When the boy confirmed this, the barbarian asked what about the other members of the team. He doubted Elpham had enough money to hire them. And by the way, they definitely need a healer or the gate won't be cleared. After explaining all this, Debo noticed a strange look on his boss's face. That's when the man realized what was in that boy's head. Elpham reassured his subordinate, however, saying that they had enough men on their team to clear the gate. With a sigh of relief, the barbarian asked his boss not to scare him like that again. While he was saying this, Elpham raised his hand and pointed his finger at him. "You and me will go there alone," muttered the boy. After this sentence, an awkward silence hung in the air. When it came to him what it meant, a horrified Debo asked his boss to tell him it was just such a stupid joke. Meanwhile, after asking his subordinate to stop wasting time, Elpham was suddenly at his back and kicked his ass into the gate. This was a turn of events the barbarian never expected. He had to sell his life for $1,000,000 to this lunatic. At the same time, there was a flash somewhere in the desolate dungeon. Flying out of the gate, Debo landed on his knees and face rolled on the ground a few meters. The man looked angrily at his boss and wondered if he was out of his mind. What could the two of them do in a gate designed for 8? Where had that asshole lost his seriousness? When the barbarian started to complain about his unfamiliar weapon, he noticed the boss's tense gaze, which caused him to stop talking. It was then that it became clear that something was wrong. Turning around, Debo noticed a huge cloud of smoke behind him. A number of stumps of some kind were running toward them. Standing up in a fighting stance, the barbarian realized that these monsters were probably attracted by his screams. They were known for their resistance to bladed weapons, and there were a lot of them here. While the man was wondering what he should do next with these stumps, Elpham stepped forward and asked his subordinate to step aside. Debo tried to talk his boss out of it, but it was too late. The opponents ran too close. But suddenly, the guy with a staff in his hand activated a fire arrow and finished off the monster, running ahead. What the barbarian saw next sent him into shock. The fiery arrow began to fly from side to side, destroying one enemy after another. In a matter of seconds, his boss dealt with the entire horde of monsters running towards them. After only a few seconds, the sounds of battle died down and the stumps were burned to the ground. It's sad that you started screaming as soon as you entered the gate, Elpham said, turning to his subordinate. Turning around on him, the boy asked the barbarian not to make that mistake again. Night of the same day, somewhere near the port city of Lit. Bowing to his master, the fighter reported that the trade guild had taken the bait. They work out a timetable for implementation, but they have no idea that there are enemy men lurking among them. Raising his head, the soldier asked his master for permission to proceed with the plan. With a glance at him, a long-haired man with a glass in his hand gave permission. Hearing this, the fighter bowed and promised to do his best. After saying that, he immediately vanished, leaving the gentleman to himself. Looking up at the moon, the long-haired man raised his glass of wine. Thy will be done. We will free the world of Maple. All the monsters were finished off with literally one attack. From all the corpses, Debo had gotten as many as 27 mana stones. Elpham in turn indifferently headed somewhere and told his subordinate to keep up. The barbarian initially thought his new boss was usually a madman, but he actually turned out to be an amazing person. This guy skillfully used telekinesis. Debo had never heard of this use of the fire arrow before. Smiling contentedly, the man realized that if he traveled with this guy, he would definitely make a lot of money. After all, he would get as much as 30% of the income. Elpham interrupted his subordinate's thoughts by pointing his finger at the sleeping opponents. Another bunch of enemies to have a good fight with. There's about 9 of them here, and that's a good number. With a puzzled look at his boss, Debo asked what he meant by an appropriate number. At the same moment, the barbarian felt that merciless gaze on him again. A small pebble fell from somewhere and woke up one stump. Suddenly, some creature with a halberd slung behind its back appeared above the monster's head. With a mighty swing, Debo struck the stump, chopping it into 2 even halves. The rest of the monsters also woke up from such a rumble. Tensely looking at his opponents, the barbarian was once again convinced that his boss was crazy. How could Debo, in his opinion, defeat them, especially with a weapon he had just picked up for the first time? Yeah, he wouldn't survive here, even with 9 lives like a cat. Trying not to get caught under the stump's claws, Debo shouted in panic that his boss was terrible. Watching his subordinate fight, Elpham realized that he would have to master the halberd for a long time to come. But this man will soon realize that this is the best kind of weapon for him. Elpham didn't even have to think to realize how much potential there was in this barbarian. He was the only one the halberd heroine had accepted as an apprentice after all. While the boy was pondering this, one of the stumps pounced on his opponent again. With a sharp lunge, Debo easily chopped him in half. That's when the man noticed that the halberd wasn't so bad. It hits at a distance, and it hits pretty hard. It's much more comfortable than a sword. It's lighter in the hand because you don't have to use force. Realizing that fighting with a halberd was not at all like when he fought with a sword, the barbarian decided to try swinging the new weapon a little more smoothly. At that moment, Debo truly became entranced by this magnificent weapon. He began to maul his opponents one by one, no longer paying attention to fear. Keeping his eyes on his subordinate, Elpham noticed that he had grasped the point very quickly. It was astonishing that he was showing such results even before the circle had awakened. Finishing the last stump, Debo felt something strange. The ground beneath his feet shook, and strange sounds began to come from the rock nearby. Suddenly, a crack appeared in this rock, from which a huge root immediately emerged. The giant creature began to climb out of the rocks, thus nearly crushing the barbarian. Jumping back to a safe distance, a dumbfounded Debo looked tensely at his opponent and asked his boss what the hell that was all about. It's a giant tree stump. What's it doing in the desert anyway? Noticing that his subordinate was literally dumbstruck with terror, Elpham rushed to his aid and saved him with a single tug. Taking the barbarian to safety, the lad threw him to the ground. As he began to charge the attack with his staff, the boy pointed out that being big wasn't always a good thing, for you become a convenient target. After saying that, he activated a fire arrow and aimed it at the enemy. Sensing that his boss was right, Debo was sure that fire magic should work against this enemy. However, surprisingly, the monster managed to repel the arrow. Their opponent's reflexes are better developed than it might seem at first glance. In that case, Elpham decided to use telekinesis to confuse the enemy. Applying his ability on the fire arrow, the guy confused the opponent and attacked him in the back. And when the boy thought he had already caught up with his target, the monster, without turning around, deflected the blow from his back with a branch. Here even Elpham was surprised. He had not expected his opponent to be able to stop his attack. Asking the boss what he's waiting for, Debo shouted that they urgently need to get away. Against this monster, even magic doesn't work. But in fact, the barbarian had misunderstood. It wasn't magic, otherwise this huge tree wouldn't have repelled the arrow but would have absorbed it. It was the branches that prevented Elpham from attacking normally. While the two guys tried to run away from it, the monster attacked them again, hitting the ground beneath their feet. The shockwave sent them flying upwards, which the enemy decided to take advantage of. While in the air in an unfortunate position, Debo turned on the enemy and saw his inevitable death approaching. In the same second, Elpham swung his hand and used a ring of telekinesis. Picking up a boulder torn from the ground beneath him, the boy lifted it into the air. Thus, they, along with the barbarian, soared into the sky, dodging the monster's attack. Once in a relatively safe place, Elpham landed his makeshift airplane. Coughing, Debo thanked his boss, saying he already thought they were finished. Asking his subordinate not to be distracted, Elpham asked him to deal with the stumps while the boy himself fought the stump. Before the barbarian could realize where the stumps had come from, the Ugo boss had already managed to fly away. Entrusting the horde of monsters to his subordinate, Elpham headed towards the boss and activated the fire staff again. Approaching the enemy, the boy shot a flaming arrow at him. Watching what was happening, Debo could not understand why the boss was doing this. It's useless. The monster can't be defeated without tactics, so they need to step back and think of a plan. As I expected the barbarian, the blast really didn't do any damage to the enemy. However, the smoke left by this explosion gave Elpham time to maneuver. Using telekinesis, the guy redirected the arrow and hit the monster. That's when the barbarian realized that such a tactic could actually work. You can see that this kid doesn't act mindlessly and tries to find a gap in his opponent's defense with every shot. The enemy is moving the branches much faster than Elpham thought. Even telekinesis won't help you strike. But since the boy has two whole circles, he can use two abilities at the same time. Thus, by distracting a monster with one arrow, a guy can damage it with another. Battling the smaller monsters, Debo marveled at his boss's resourcefulness. He hid one arrow under the other. Even though the monster was nimble, there was no way he could stop two strikes in a row. To think the stump is overpowered by only one man. Perhaps Elpham is much stronger than the barbarian imagined. That's it. Just one shot left and this monster will go. But it couldn't have been that simple. Elpham, who was busy fighting the dungeon boss, was attacked from behind by small stumps. After warning the boss of the danger, Debo realized that he had accidentally missed a couple of enemies because there were too many of them. However, even such small interference was not a problem for Elpham. Without even looking at his opponents, he easily finished them off with telekinesis. Looking at his subordinate with disdain, the guy asked if he couldn't even deal with ordinary monsters. At the same time, the dungeon boss decided to take the chance given by the stumps. The monsters tried to attack the vigilant boy, but in the end, Elpham managed to dodge the blow. Noticing that his opponent was in a vulnerable position, the stump swung the branch, preparing to finish the guy off. There was literally a couple centimeters until the root would have made contact with his face. As suddenly, running up from the back, Debo grabbed his boss by the shoulder. Throwing the boy aside, the barbarian chopped the monster's branch, thus keeping Elpham alive. The man then landed on the ground and prepared for the next attack. "I saved your ass, now we're even," Debo muttered, turning around to look at his boss. Hearing those words, Elpham only smirked. Summoning two fiery arrows, the guy took a moment to notice that he had recouped his cost. Well, now it's time to end this protracted battle.
Pet the cat.